Welcome back to Neutrality Studies, and today we are joined by two wonderful Indian colleagues. I've got with me Professor Anuradha Chenoy, the former Dean of the School of International Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, and Kanika Raka, an assistant professor at the Kautilya School of Public Policy. Anu, Kanika, welcome.
Hi, Pascal. Glad to be here.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you both online. And Anu, sorry for always butchering the name of the university. It's just so difficult to pronounce. But let's go straight into the topic, which is India in 2026. What we are seeing right now, we are recording on Thursday, January 22nd, is there's a lot going on in Davos, in Switzerland, in my home country. And it seems that Western elites are giving up on this entire charade of, it's a rules-based international order and everybody is equal. We've seen the Canadian Prime Minister saying out loud, let's give up the charade. We all know this was a hegemony of the United States, and it seems the Europeans are willing to end it. However, India and the BRICS states have been working and have been saying for years that this system cannot continue working. Anu, what are your thoughts about this?
Two things, Pascal. Firstly, I think, the outburst at Davos from Carney and from others is primarily on account of Greenland and Trump's policies towards not even the Western Hemisphere, but to the Northwestern Hemisphere. They're not reacting to Venezuela. They're reacting to Greenland and Canada. And they specifically, for example, Macron even said in his tweet to Trump directly, which came out, that, we are with you on Iran and Venezuela, but why Greenland? Leave that alone. So the neo-colonial continuity to me seems quite clear as far as Davos is concerned. And the press around Trump also said that he was going there to gather some more billions. The BRICS countries on these issues, they have been saying this for years. And that is why they were formed, because they don't have a voice and they want to link both with the West. They're not against the West, but they want to carry the global South with them, especially at a time where this kind of imperial politics has become so explicit under Trump. Earlier, it had different cover, democracy, etc. So at the same time, the BRICS are being threatened because Trump is very systematically trying to attack all the BRICS. And you can see that, the kind of confrontation individually with BRICS countries, not collectively, of course, because it is not that kind of collective. It's a trade, more interested in trade and economics and finance. But Russia, China, Iran, that's the three leading BRICS countries. Brazil already under attack, and Trump saying that he would put 10% tariffs on any countries which has anything to do with BRICS. But at the same time, BRICS is also continuing with their own agenda, gradually, not in a, I think they use the Chinese kind of slogan, which said, increase your capabilities and bide your time. So just a day before yesterday, 2 days ago, this has been a process, but the Indian central bank, which we call Reserve Bank of India, they have actually proposed to the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister that digital currency exchange between BRICS would be on the agenda of the BRICS meeting this year, of which India is the chair. Now, that's a very big step because it will be direct. It will be not like the SWIFT, but it will facilitate currency and trade swap deals between the BRICS countries and make it easier. This was proposed just in Rio last year, and no one thought that so quickly the Indian Central Bank would already work it out. And if they say they want it on the agenda, it means that India has agreed to it. Whereas on other things, India was going a bit slow, and there's a lot of pressure from the United States on India to go slow on BRICS. Otherwise, and that is why the tariffs issue has not been resolved. In fact, it has been increased. So you can see that BRICS is going to continue to to respond to the US. They're not going to accept the kind of pressure that you don't have these kind of plurilateral or minilateral, whatever you want to call it, alliances. They're not even an alliance; it's just a forum in which they're focusing on the material basis of multipolarity.
I see. Kanika, like these, we've seen attacks on BRICS recently, right? And the Donald Trump has said out loud, he doesn't want states to cooperate in that format. And, especially Brazil, the Southern Hemisphere belongs to the United States. And he has made a lot of enemies actually with India. It's quite amazing how he managed to wreck that relationship. What is your assessment of this?
So maybe I'll also respond to what Professor Chenoy was speaking earlier as well. And when you look at the way in which Donald Trump has sort of butchered the relationship with India, it's honestly very surprising. And one of the things that comes out is when Jeffrey Sachs made a recent comment in the UN about how Trump is behaving and what he was doing wrong, it sort of found so much reverence within the Indian media and within the Indian strategic community that everyone wanted to know more about why this thought is coming from and how Americans are thinking about it. Because if you look at Indian foreign policy before, it's not been a very comfortable journey to think that an alliance with the United States would ever have been a possibility. The fact that Indian strategic community moved beyond and went into a strategic partnership there was a lot of change that had to happen within the Indian strategic community, within how India works with the United States, because of the distrust that came through before of how during the Cold War the relationship was. So that crossing that barrier was a big step within India, and for the US to then butcher the relationship after India crossed that barrier was something that will not sit very comfortably within India as well. I'm not sure how it sits with the United States right now, but definitely not with India. And just to respond to something that Professor Chenoy was mentioning about the BRICS and how the Global South are looking at the Canadian Prime Minister's comments, I do feel that there is a sense of unity that starts coming in, because when we look at how the Global South as a whole was the whole conversation on the Global South, how the narrative started building, a lot of the strategic community was feeling that the Global South doesn't necessarily have a unified agenda, and that's one of the weaknesses of the Global South when you look at it in terms of how the G7 behaves and how it engages with the world. But slowly and surely, you're seeing that there is a sense of unity that is coming through in terms of what they want from the world, and it changes a lot in terms of your engagement as well, right? Because earlier Global South countries were all on the receiving end of aid, on the receiving end of a lot of institutional structures. But now if they start defining those institutional structures, then the change starts happening gradually, and then they start coming on board as one as well.
Hey, very brief intermission because I was recently banned from YouTube, and although I'm back, this can happen anytime again. So please consider subscribing not only here, but to my mailing list on Substack. That's pascalotta.substack.com. The link's going to be in the description below, and now back to the video. I mean, one of the main issues is that a lot of the global infrastructure is just still Western. And that's why it's so easy for the US and the Europeans to dominate these, including, of course, international investment infrastructure. On the one hand, the BRICS have said that they want to build alternatives to this. On the other hand, they signaled that they don't want to fight against the existing ones, right? It's not about like destroying those. It seems though that the United States has the idea of a wrecking ball. Anu, what are you seeing? What India is now trying to contribute to this new infrastructure, maybe over and beyond the payment system?
Well, look, one is, of course, the Global South is not coordinated. They don't have a command center. It's never been a hegemon. No one in the Global South has ever been hegemonic. Regional powers, yes, but within a hierarchy of the Western hegemony. So at the most, what they have is a non-aligned movement where they meet once in a year or 2 years, and there's a summit, and it's very declaratory. but it gives indications of how these countries move. And out of this, BRICS has emerged. As far as institutions is concerned, yes, they have the New Development Bank, or the BRICS Infrastructure Bank, it's called. But within, and since they meet once every year, as they meet, there are almost each of the country who has a presidency has almost 100 meetings, which are very dispersed. So BRICS Global, BRICS Youth, BRICS Women, BRICS Businessmen. So these are not regular institutions, but they have formed into networks which are meeting and coordinating and developing strategies. That is how last year, when India was earlier presidency, they proposed of G20, they proposed that the African Union be part of the G20, and that African Union come, and at least attend the BRICS meetings. So they are conscious that they have to carry along the global south. As far as other things are concerned, BRICS has no intention of excluding the West. It's non-West. It's not anti-West. They respect and want to all of them, even when there's a confrontation with China. And I think it's come out on many of your conversations in neutrality studies, how the Chinese point of view is that they would like to engage with the US and the West on equal terms. So what they want is dignity, equality, and inclusion. And very importantly, multipolarity. So a non-hegemonic world, that's it, with all, like the UN Charter. So the institution that they rely on is the UN Charter and its body, from which Trump himself, just a few days ago, he's removed the US from over 60 bodies of the United Nations. But for the BRICS, for the Global South, the UN is the main organization still. They still rely on it, because for the weak, that is still the best institution. So why make alternate institution? So this board of peace of Trump, for example, for which I think you did a very good analysis, is really a Ponzi scheme where it's not an alternate to the United Nations, and I think I agree with that. But it's something which Trump wants to, kind of lord over and dictate. And it's not just about the Gaza peace board and plan. It's about any conflict, meaning the countries on it will, maybe intervene or be a sounding board for Trump on Sudan or Somalia or wherever. So BRICS is looking at that. Just today I saw that India does have issues about joining that, even though Pakistan and UAE, etc., and Netanyahu have all joined the Board of Peace, and maybe they will give the $1 billion involved. I don't know. So I hope India does not join and keep to this and keeps to its principle of strategic autonomy. And I think these are the principles, or these are the conceptual framework of the BRICS countries, even if sometimes they are at conflict with each other or their issues. They're negotiating their way through this very volatile international terrain through these concepts of multipolarity, strategic autonomy, opposing unilateral sanctions, independence of choice, and hoping that others will join them in this.
Yeah, and it's sometimes forgotten that BRICS among themselves are already multipolar, right? They already work in that way, just like ASEAN works on a very not eclectic, but a interconnected way, right? Among each other. It's not hierarchical the way that the West is structured in large parts. And just one comment. I mean, the fact that Russia said they want to join. I mean, he said they want to join with $1 billion of frozen assets. I mean, it's It's almost like Putin is trolling them and trolling back Donald Trump. It's just like they're being very clever on each other. You can see this. But Kanika, let's you were at a conference of mine 5 years ago, and I do remember that you were actually writing. I've got your presentation somewhere here. You gave a presentation about the non-aligned movement and the NPT. So you've looked at the non-aligned movement quite a bit and India's role in it. Can you maybe link or connect a little bit India, the non-aligned movement, and today's BRICS from what you know?
Also, I'll add a little bit of my response to Professor Chenoy here as well. When we look at the NAM today, I'm not sure if I can say that it is any more existent. I mean, it's as relevant as the NPT, I would say, at this point of time, as a treaty. As you have meetings, you go for these meetings, but how much comes out of the NAM or the NPT right now is up for debate, and not much that gives a credibility in terms of how it can take the conversation forward for states. When we look at the BRICS, then while Dr. Chenoy was right, or Professor Chenoy was right when she pointed out that the BRICS are coming together and they're working together on the New Development Bank and they're looking at digital currency, there is also this reality that we cannot deny, which is that the BRICS within themselves have a lot of issues as well. And I'm primarily referring to India and China in this case, but there are many other states that come in on board. While BRICS has been careful in terms of the type of the countries that it picks in the BRICS Plus that it is building up. For example, Argentina has been trying to get in, but has not been able to get in. Neither has Pakistan been able to get in. So you're being conscious of the original BRICS countries and their requirements in how the BRICS Plus becomes. It's also a reality that within the BRICS also there are many issues that are unresolved. So while you're comparing, for example, ASEAN and BRICS, I don't think that's a good example because ASEAN, when it came together, it was very conscious of the fact that it will not let its its bilateral problems or its territorial disputes come into ASEAN in any way. But that ASEAN is obviously now crumbling with that as well because it's not able to work with Myanmar. It's not able to look at the Thailand Cambodia issue and be neutral in any way. So this becomes a problem when in the long term for BRICS as well in how they are able to work together. One advantage that the G7 had up until last year was that within them there were no confusions in terms of no space contestations on sovereignty, right? Everyone within the G7 or the Global North, as we refer to them, were pretty much aligned in terms of how they looked at the world. But the Global South earlier did not align so much, which is why when you look at the engagement with the West, it's never an anti-West, which we were discussing. It's not an anti-West concept. You want to engage with the West as much because within the Global South and the BRICS, there are still issues of contention that may lead to problems in the long term.
Anu, how do you think that this is playing out? I mean, especially the the point of contestation, as Kanika said.
Well, look, firstly, I have a different kind of paradigm than I believe that very often NAM, and the meeting was held in Kampala last year, and it will be held again this year. What their use is that they're able to say upfront what many of these countries are hesitant to say because of their fear of the United States. So on Venezuela, for example, and the intervention, India didn't make any very strident statement of condemnation of international law, violation of international law. They just said, the situation is unfolding and we have to see. But the NAM said this is an act of war. And they said it collectively as a group of 120 global South states. So these countries of the South, they have their weaknesses. Many of them are in delicate conversation with the United States over tariffs, and so they are hedging all the time. But NAM can say it, and under the cover of NAM, they make these statements. That's one. Second, I believe NAM, it was, it's not a military or any kind of alliance. It gives direction and norms. And Kanika's right. It appears it has very little relevance. But for me, whether it's ASEAN or BRICS or the African Union or CELAC in Latin America, they stand on the shoulders of NAM in the sense that they're democratic. So there will be problems, but there are bilateral and sometimes even wars between NAM countries, India and Pakistan, I remember, but India and Pakistan or whatever. But at the same time, if you see the ASEAN principles, or if you see Vietnam's foreign policy of the four no's, or many of what the Southeast Asian or the Asian countries or the African countries say, you can see the roots go back to what NAM had said over the years from the 1960s in their official statements till now. And their whole focus is that we don't want to be part of a military alliance. We do not want to be part of any confrontational blocs. We want to focus on development. We want to focus on mutual relations. We want an integrated international system. We want to go along with the UN Charter. So the words are the ideas which then shape behavior. I mean, that is how I see it. So I'm not writing off NAM. I see it just as something which is exchanging ideas on a conceptual framework, and then whether it's regional organizations, I could draw parallels between what NAM has said and what Shanghai Cooperation Organization, for example, has said, or what the African Union has said, if you look at the documents, or what happened at the G20 in South Africa, and what Ramaphosa said during the meeting, and why the US boycotted. So they are in a kind of a gentle confrontation with the West without being anti-West, as Kanika said. They're very pro-West, in fact, but they would like to gain advantages from all these confrontational rivalries, etc., and somehow gain from them and work in the United Nations and not let it go.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting, actually, that we have international organizations that are built to have very concrete force and power. Like NATO obviously is one, right? They can go and bomb stuff. That's ultimate power. But then we have other institutions that are built differently. And, the United Nations is built in a way that it cannot be used against any one of the great powers, right? With the 5 veto powers or their core interests. The NUM is built in a way that it functions only as a framework. I had a very interesting discussion with the former foreign minister of Malta, who foreign minister in the 70s, Alexander Trigona, and he told me the person who opposed and made it impossible for the non-aligned movement to have a headquarter, with a general secretary and so on, was Tito. Tito opposed it because he had said, if we do a headquarter and formal institution, then the Soviets going to take it over. he was afraid of the Soviets actually like intervening in that. So they kept it explicitly like vague. And in a sense, like BRICS seems to be following in those footsteps for now. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, of course, has a headquarter and defined structures, but BRICS is still in a situation where they do coordination and not integration, right? Kanika and then Anu, what do you think? Is the West, will we see the first Western country at some point trying to join that movement, or are we still far away from that?
So by movement, you mean the non-aligned movement?
Sorry, I meant BRICS, not the non-aligned movement. Has 2 or 3 Western countries, right? Malta and I'm not sure. Is Ireland part of it too? I'm not sure though. No. But Cyprus used to be, I think.
Yes, Cyprus used to be.
Yeah. But maybe Kanika, do you think that there will be now an incentive that, for BRICS or for Western states to try to approach the BRICS? Because as you said, this is the first time that now Western states have a serious disagreement over who gets that plot of territory? Greenland. It's like it's quite.
Maybe it's Iceland. We don't know. Because Donald Trump made that mistake with Iceland and Greenland. And,
Oh, right.
But coming back to what you were talking about with BRICS and the possibility of Western state joining BRICS, I would feel that there's it's a double-edged sword in terms of how you approach it. Either if you're looking at BRICS as a China-led process, and how the countries want to join BRICS, or then they want to join SCO, because that is China and Russia sort of co-led as a structure, that would determine a lot of how they approach the new multilateral space. What we're seeing now is more and more, because of what you mentioned earlier as well, because when Trump is withdrawing from all of the treaties and he's getting out of many multilateral groupings, it means then that every grouping that is coming together has its own say in what it wants to do on a specific issue. But then it also means that the UN definitely gets weaker by the day. One is that. Then the other issue that comes through is no country is going to be only dependent on one grouping to determine a lot of what it says and does. So, for example, with the G7, you knew that there was alignment on every issue that came through on a global at a global level. But here, I believe if there is any state that ends up joining the BRICS for some issue, then it may also end up joining another grouping and a trilateral grouping for another issue. So what we're seeing now is for India, Australia, and China coming together and discussing technology partnership, or we're looking at Quad exercises happening. BRICS is trying to look at development of the development bank or digital payments as a structure. So there are issue-based engagements that are going to define more the multilateral engagement rather than being a holistic sort of engagement, what we saw earlier.
Right, and as you said earlier, Anu, like it seems as if though, this non-aligned, this idea of non-alignment seems actually to be gaining a lot of traction, right? We are moving into a non-aligned world, except for the United States, except for NATO. Nobody's building an alliance, even though the West wants to portray any kind of opposition to its leadership as an alliance. I mean, Russia and China are not in an alliance. Even the support that they gave to Iran in the recent regime change operation was not an alliance. It was support, punctually, right, on that one issue. And we see the other groupings that are not creating permanent structures and alliances. We rather see how states are trying to individually move forward. Do you also see it like that?
Absolutely. Number one, I don't see any new kind of permanent alliance, with an alliance structure or with an Article 5 kind of thing happening at all. In fact, it's being discredited because what's happening, I think, is also linked to your earlier question of whether do you think any Western country would join BRICS. Everyone can see what's happening within NATO and the EU, where they're kind of, going more apart than they ever were since post the Second World War, where the differences are increasing. And when Europe was so dependent on the United States, and now some of them are seeing the US as a threat because of Greenland and the fear. So when they thought the threat was coming only from the eastern flank, from Russia, it's also coming, it could still be coming from there, but it's also coming from the US. So there would be if it goes further, if it doesn't recede, if it continues. I think the kind of synergy that Europe had with the US has been damaged to some extent, just as the kind of love that the Indian strategic community had for the US has been damaged. It's become an unrequited love. It's more one-sided. So in this 1 year or so, Trump's foreign policy has upset a lot of traditional alliances and building strategic partnerships. And in that, there is volatility and the world is shifting. So I can't really judge which country would join BRICS, but they definitely some of these countries want to join the New Development Bank, which is a stellar institution of the BRICS. And that is moving ahead. It's nothing compared to the World Bank or the IMF. But it's an interesting, and the other thing is, it's not I wouldn't call it an alternative. I'd just call it different. An alternative would be, alternative to the dominant neoliberal capitalist system, which it's not. It's very much part of the system, but it has differences in the sense it doesn't have conditions. It's not donor led. It's recipient. The recipient decides what they want to use the loans for. You get part of the loans in your national currencies, which is a huge thing, and that is what is really making the US very tense. This whole phobia of de-dollarization, which is not there. The dollar continues to be the dominant strategic currency of exchange internationally and will do so. It's just that these countries are looking for trade with each other in national currencies, which helps them to some extent bypass and circumvent the dominant dollar system and helps them save a lot of foreign exchange. And some countries which are very indebted, especially the least developed countries, they are able to do these kind of swap deals, and the digital currency exchange or the digital e-currency within the BRICS first and then later with others will definitely help this. But this will all again be globalized trade, which is what everyone wants, without one power dictating the terms of trade and so on.
It was quite ironic that Scott Bessent, the trade secretary, yesterday or the day before yesterday, actually said globalization failed the United States. Or was it somebody? It wasn't Bessent. It was somebody else. But one of the trade representatives said,
maybe Lutnick.
Lutnick, yeah, that globalization failed the United States, and I'm like, yeah, you are the largest economy on the globe. In what way, shape, or form did it fail you? Plus, as Anu just said, like this whole scheme, it cannot be overestimated. What kind of scheme it is when you give another country a loan denominated in your own currency, because you're basically telling this country you either figure out a way to make money on my turf, or otherwise you're never going to be able to pay it back. So it's such a scheme. So yes, I mean, changing to local currencies is a huge step forward for the recipient countries. But Kanika, how do you see it? Like the way in which now the new mode of engagement probably is going to go forward, and how India will try to shape it.
Do you mean in terms of currency or just multilaterally?
Multilateral, and this recipient countries, donor countries, and the global development. Maybe also the question I want to ask is about globalization, because again, the US and some people in the West say like globalization, the way we knew it, is done, but I don't think so. I mean, it seems just globalization is changing its cloak.
I mean, all states are definitely looking more and more inward. It's the new wave of how globalization is being understood by all states. Whether it's when you look at migration policies of Europe, or whether you look at how every state is becoming more cautious about tariffs and what it means for their states, for their people. So all states are becoming more cautious for sure. But when it comes to engagement in terms of globalization, I'm not sure. The only loser in this whole process, I think, is the process of finding values and norms that can define how states engage. Because of the nature of geopolitics today, all states are given that space also to then be more cautious or to be more hardline in terms of their engagement with other states. So there is less space for negotiation, there is less space for discussion, and there is more space then for states to think on terms of militaristic values, right? So whether it is engagement, if it's engagement, for example, on technology or on critical minerals, there will be a lot of caution in how states engage with each other, and trust becomes a deficit, I think, in terms of your relationship in engagement. So if in case you will look at spaces only where you are comfortable engaging with, you won't be able to go beyond and build on something that can come out which would be beneficial for the world. These are things that that we may miss out on globally, because you would look at collaboration that would be as an Indian, you may want to collaborate only with maybe specific countries or countries scholarship, because you're not confident of how the states are going to behave with each other. Tomorrow there could be a ban on engagement of scholarship. There could be a ban on travel. Anything can happen because there's we're living in such a volatile time. So everyone then becomes cautious in their engagement as well. So that, I think, is one of the feedback or the followers of the current situation that we're in.
Anu, do you see it? Do you see it like that as well? And do you think that the states will try to create these new normative frameworks? I mean, the United States basically tore down the World Trade Organization, which was all about let's create the baseline of how we trade with each other and also internally, right? Like investment security and so on. And all of that is gone. Any kind of investment in the United States at the moment is just as well Russian roulette, right? You don't know if it's still going to be there next year or if Donald Trump just going to expropriate it, put tariffs, whatnot. I mean, there's no more investment security for anyone.
That's right. And I think I'm going to link two of your questions together, or what there is a belief amongst the United States trade representatives that globalization was bad for them, which it was, because that was a period of US decline. And why? Because they were the ones who outsourced manufacturing.
Yes.
So the industrialization from the US and even maybe from some of the European countries, including Germany, shifted first to China, then India, to the south. What were the Asian tigers and the Southeast Asian miracle? It was a spurt in industrialization, manufacturing, and export-led growth, where their exports flooded these markets. They were cheap exports. But it was a part of a concerted policy where these very important trading and industrial countries decided that they didn't want these dirty industries polluting them. They would live off patents and ideas, and the finance and the industries would go to Asia, Africa, Latin America. And that is how the BRICS countries actually had a great surge in development. So yes, globalization was bad for them. But as far as the second question, I think there's a duality. I think Kanika is correct. There is an inward looking, and that is why it's Make America Great Again. But what does it mean? It means, on the one hand, self-reliance, that they would like to have this leverage that no other country can then suddenly say, no more rare earths for you, and your industries collapse. So they would like a self-reliance and everything. But at the same time, they cannot survive without trade. So why is the US, for example, now selling its weapons and its military industrial complex to the whole world? They're insisting to Europe, to India, to everyone, you buy our weapons and we will lower our tariffs. So trade cannot stop, globalization cannot stop, but it can take slightly different terms, as I think Joseph Stiglitz and others have argued, that for your economies, the world has always been integrated, but the terms of trade, the terms of globalization can change. And your third point about normative, how can you live in a world without norms? And there's no legitimacy then. You can see that Trump is gradually delegitimizing himself, even if states don't say so. The mainstream newspaper is gradually saying so. 2 days ago, the New York Times had a fantastic issue on how much money the Trump family has made. Now, that is delegitimizing your own president, showing the level of corruption, the oligarchs, the 12 billionaires in Trump's cabinet. So you have to have norms. You have to get back to the UN Charter. Maybe you need to reform it. You need to expand it. Even small countries now have agency, and we saw that in terms of Brazil and even Cuba saying, the US, we are going to continue our policies. We don't care what you say. Other countries will bend. So there are these shifts, but globalization in different forms will continue to exist.
How do you think, Kanika, that India will engage in global trade from here on? I mean, if you look at the development, at the numbers, if you compare China and India, you can see how India still has like a large potential to catch up with China, right? In terms of global engagement, just economic growth, period. What do you think will India's approach be now, especially 2026 when it has this BRICS chairmanship?
Yeah, well, the BRICS chairmanship is something that's going to be interesting in how India approaches it, because India's G20 chairmanship showed that it was keen to look at multilateral engagement and bring a very Indian structure to it. And also because the G20, just like the BRICS, also has a moving secretariat, doesn't have a permanent space. So it's easy to then bring more of your chairmanship into the presidency. So BRICS presidency, from the likes of how it is going right now, it seems that India is putting in as much effort as it did during the G20 presidency as well. But we'll definitely see how that shapes up in the coming months. However, when we look at India's engagement on trade, which is what you were talking about earlier, it would be interesting to. I mean, I personally feel that it may be very cautious at this point of time, because there is no space within how Indian strategic communities is building up, or how India's foreign policy is building up, where it can freely engage with China because of its own past with respect to China. And with the West, there is a lot more in terms of how the US is behaving with tariffs. So that also restricts India's engagement. So Europe is the only one place where I can foresee that there will be far more freer engagement in terms of trade, and a more engagement on on a range of multilateral issues. And Russia would be one where it would continue to engage. But China and the US both at this point of time are problem spaces where India needs to define how it will further its engagement. With respect to China, it's interesting that you see a thawing of the relationship, because there was disengagement that happened on the borders. And recently also we saw that the Chinese CCP had come to visit, and they visited the current Indian government's party office, and they met and they engaged on a range of issues. So it is an evolving space on how India and China build this relationship together. That would define a lot of how Asia then engages with itself. Because on my own engagement with a number of scholars around the world, whenever I speak to anyone from the global south, they all speak that if only India and China get along, then everything will work out well for us. But there are limitations in terms of sovereignty issues for both India and for China. And I'm not taking a side here, but just because there are these issues that they need to work out. If they're able to do that, then maybe there is something in store, hopefully positive for 2026 for us as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you had India and China on the same page, that's basically 3 billion people. That's more than a third of the planet on the page. Anu, how likely is that?
Well, first, I would just want to say, give one bit of information that I found interesting, and that is that recently India lifted its ban on Chinese direct investment in the Indian market, even for government contracts.
Okay.
So that means China can do large investments and apply for tenders in the Indian economy, which is a big shift. Second, they have given a provision for making e-visas for Chinese businessmen, and just apply online, and Chinese businessmen and probably others can just come in for something like 50 or 60 days without any issue. And China's done the same. So you can see that, of course, as far as the conflict is concerned on the border, that is a sensitive area for India, but it is improving very slowly. There have been over 100 meetings between the working groups, but the political will has to come for a compromise. There has been improvement. Mr. Modi went to Tianjin for the SCO meeting, and earlier met Xi Jinping in other meetings, and they have said that they would like better relations. But the trade relations have really increased to over $100 billion with the advantage with China. So, the India imports more. But the thing about the India-China economic relations, which I believe form the material basis for other relations, is that, a lot of Indian industry and even pharmaceutical, they depend on the precursor from China. So if India is making a lot of antibiotics and exporting those all over, India is called a pharmacy or for the global south, and exporting those all over the south, some of the material needed for the antibiotic comes from China. So there is a developing economic dependence, just like for the iPhones and, like everyone does for magnets and for the batteries, etc. So there is this dependence, there is an understanding, but at the same time, there are issues on both sides which, separate them still. But on the international platforms, in multilateral institutions, whether it's on climate or on sanctions or on specific issues of the third world, there is a lot of compatibility. Recently, for example, just last week, Israel and the US recognized Somaliland, meaning a split of Somalia. And India issued a very strong statement saying that, Somalia, the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Somalia should not be disturbed. I don't know the exact words, but they were critical of both Israel and the US, though they have good relations with Israel, and very often they were very muted on the Gaza issue, but at the same time giving assistance to the PLO and Gaza. So this is their so-called multi-vector policy, this side and that side. But they definitely do have development very much in mind. The government has to deliver on development, without which any government in India would be on a weak footing or elsewhere in the world. So these are the constraints which push it towards, and for China too, at a time when they're facing this very harsh confrontation from the West, where a lot, even if the US is saying that, and there you can see the split between the European Union and the US to some extent, with Merz going to Beijing and Macron, and no matter what they said, but they are trying to build some relations independent of the US with China. So China is something you cannot ignore. They're a factor. They are a push in what is happening, and they're taking stronger positions. And I think that's one of the reasons also why you may not see an attack on Iran. I don't know, but China and Russia and others have pushed back on it.
They sure did, but I think what you said is very important. I mean, on the one hand, now the structural incentive for more South-South relationship is quite high for economic exchange and purposes. And on the other hand, the Europeans, I mean, there's no reasonable scenario under which China is a threat to the Europeans, and even less India. So in a sense, we should expect that even the Europeans come around and say like, hey, maybe we need to talk to New Delhi a little bit more often. And maybe just for a last round, first Kanika and then Anu, anything that you would like to bring up of this discussion that you think is important, and then we'll wrap it up.
So, well, just because you mentioned Europeans and EU is the European Union is this time the head of EU is the guest of honor for the Republic Day parade that's happening next week on the 26th. And there's a big deal that's supposed to come through on the 27th, a trade deal between the EU and India. It's been many decades, I think, in the making, if not years. And it's finally coming through in terms of the fact that both these spaces, Europe and India, want to work with each other. And they found a common ground after many years of negotiation and many rounds of negotiation last year. So that's one thing that, of course, they are looking, Europe is looking to work with India on platter. But the other thing that I would like to say is about Europe's engagement with China. It's a complicated space because Europe on Europe necessarily may not have an issue with China, but because of its own ties with the G7 and with NATO, I think there was a lot more that was coming through in terms of how it engaged with China. But with the Russia-Ukraine conflict coming through, and with the way in which Trump is behaving, it changes so much in how Europe or EU is now going to look at China, which is actually advantage China at this point of time. So it's a success story for them in terms of how they build that relationship, because Europe also has a aging population that needs to figure out many other aspects of its engagement, and it has a migration problem that's coming through from Africa and from West Asia. So those issues then determine a lot of how it's going to build, I think, its engagement, rather than how NATO and the G7 look at global problems now.
Yeah. And Anu, the last word goes to you.
Yeah, so that's right. I think that the India-European Union Free Trade Agreement looks like it will finally be signed. It's been in process for over 12 years. They have not been able to agree, especially on agriculture.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obvious why, because both countries need to save their farmers. So they might have found a middle way. The details haven't come out, but I look forward to reading between the lines on what actually comes out of it. The German Chancellor was here recently, and there were several agreements on cooperation signed with them. So as far as India and the EU is concerned, they've never really had any conflict of relations between them, except for the fact that when the EU was told by, or whatever, they came and tried to put a lot of pressure on India to move away from Russia, which is not possible for India. They will not just do it. It's that one steady relationship since the 1950s. They're celebrating 70 years of their relationship. And when Mr. Putin came, they signed a slew of treaties, including joint production of all kinds of military equipment, opening up to trade, and all kinds of things. There's no time to go into that, but I think we discussed it earlier in one of our bilaterals. So that's where it is. And it's an interesting geopolitical situation which is unfolding, and India looks like navigating its way through it. Sometimes, personally, I'm quite critical if they don't take a strong stand on Gaza or Venezuela. But I can see, but the fact is, this souring of relations with the US has again made them a bit more independent, because they were tending to, want a lot of more dependency on the US than is good for a non-aligned, even if they don't call themselves non-aligned, a strategic autonomy and a multipolar country which is committed to these kind of ideas, and a country which needs to be a leader in norms.
Yeah, and I recommend everybody to just look and study what India is doing, because it's a very it's one of the very important case studies actually of this developing multi-polar world. I would like to thank you both for your time and your insights, Anuradha Chenoy and Kanika Raka. Thank you for today.
Thanks, Pascal. Thanks, Kanika.
Thank you, ma'am. Bye-bye.